Welcome to Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. I'm David Helvard, and today I'll be talking with Ian Urbina, prize-winning New York Times reporter turned author. Ian's 8-part series, The Outlaw Ocean, has been expanded into a best-selling book and global project. I'm starting the first full episode of Rising Tide with a journalist based on my own belief that the only ocean resource not fully exploited is good stories.
Everywhere I looked, there were stories about the ocean, but not so much about
the people of the ocean.
Yeah,
this is what I often talk about, the blue beat, the idea that the only resource not fully exploited in the ocean is good stories.
That's right. Yeah, and there are a lot of them. It's hard
so
to get, but
you went to the New York Times and they immediately said, "Oh, what a great idea, Ian."
Quite to the contrary. No, it took many years and many pitches at editors to find the right one. But so as an investigative reporter, I typically had a meeting once a year where my editor at that time would say, what do you have on stock for a next project? And I usually would bring this one out. And finally, I had an editor who had worked on ports before. This is an editor named Rebecca Corbett. She was David Simon's editor at the Baltimore Sun. David Simon, the creator of The Wire. And she had overseen Pulitzer Prize-winning series about shipbreaking that the Baltimore Sun ran. So she knew a little bit about the space and kind of just how rich it was. And I think partially for that reason.
Shipbreaking literally being taking apart giant tankers and container ships by hand on the shores, the sandy shores of Bangladesh and India.
Yep. And just sort of the series was looking at the sort of egregious labor conditions of that work, and environmental hazards also involved in it. And so needless to say, she kind of got it from the get-go and said, why don't you sort of write up a story list of what you might tackle. And she initially said, sure, but let's not focus on the fish. Let's really focus on the people, and then we'll back our way into the environmental story. And at first I thought that was a terrible idea. I didn't really understand how you could do it, but quickly I realized it was the right way to go about it.
So when did you start? You sort of ran in parallel in terms of the early things you discovered about slavery at sea and parallel investigation that seemed to get underway around the same time.
It was not a secret that the problem of sea slavery. I was in Thailand same time as the team from the Associated Press were, and where they did amazing reporting and went deep, on the topic of sea slavery. I was more trying to go wide, and broad, and look at a variety of different things, not just sea slavery, but, murder caught on camera and abuse of stowaways and dumping of oil and repo men who steal ships and, kind of the broad diversity of characters out there to make a larger point about the lack of governance.
So I called it Blue Frontier, and you're talking about the Wild Frontier, the lack of
watery
governance.
Wild West. That's right. Yeah. But yeah, so the first story that the paper wanted me to tackle, initially it was going to be a 3-part series, and the first of those 3 was, we were going to actually publish them all sort of in consecutive days, so I'd have to write and report them all out, for many months beforehand and get them all prepped. And the first one was about sea slavery, and that was in Thailand. And just my hope was to look at the most acute versions of sea slavery were on these transshipment sort of distant water vessels where these migrant trafficked workers tended to stay much longer periods, and the cases were more acute. But they're hard ships to get out to because they're really far.
But once you get on the water, it's like getting to the front lines. You actually found captains who let you stay aboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, initially it took a while, a couple weeks of wining and dining captains, and initially the thought was I had Adam Dean, a British photographer, and I were thinking we could convince one captain to take us all the way out, and that didn't really pan out. So then we were just trying to convince a captain to take us 50 miles out and then talk our way onto a next vessel, and he would take us 50 more out. And that finally worked, sort of hopscotching our way on and looking for the right kind of vessel. And the one that we ended up profiling even as we approached, it was really obvious that this was going to be a sort of perfect poster child of, because it was just a really crowded, rundown vessel. You could tell the crew was all Cambodian, 40 crew and 5 Thai officers, and they'd been out at sea for quite a while. And you could see rats even approaching. As we were approaching the vessel, that was just overrun with vermin. And so I thought, okay, this is home.
Right.
My panacea.
And for days it was. And you actually, what struck with me is you describing sleeping and what you realized was essentially the venting port for the diesel engine.
Yeah. So on one ship, I had wanted to go look at where these guys bed at night, and sort of the only way you could get down there was on your hands and knees and sort of crawl down this cavern. And the deeper I went, the hotter it got, and the more lightheaded I got, and the louder it got. And along the hallway, sort of on either side were these cubbies, kind of the size of a coffin that the men were clearly sleeping in. They were at work when I was doing this, and I realized soon that this was actually the engine room didn't have proper ventilation, but instead was essentially using that hallway as the smokestack. And so these guys were literally
breathing bunker fuel.
Sleeping in a exhaust pipe. So just it all sums up to pretty amazingly brutal working conditions. And I'm shocked anew. We were talking before. I just got back a month ago from a patrol off the coast of the Gambia, and the goal there was to board and inspect Chinese fishing vessels, and we boarded and arrested 3, and these were mostly Senegalese and Sierra Leoneans who were on these ships and
working for the Chinese.
And one ship in particular, where the men were sleeping, was literally a large metal box. It was I couldn't believe it. It had no windows. It had a steel plate that had been cut in a metal wall, and that was the entry point. And then when you wanted to close it, you had to put a latch through it, but there was no ceiling to it, and it was on the level of the deck. So when water came on deck, it would go right into this room, and there are foam mattresses that lined the space, and a power cord and a power strip in there. So add it all up, you've got an oven that catches fire real quick.
Right. And how many men were sleeping in there?
There were 8 men in a space that should handle 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like the stuff you remember from slave pictures and history books.
So when the Chinese masters just thought this was fine.
Yeah, I mean, just the
Ship
desperation, is so acute that they just shrug it off. When you're talking about terrorism, the motivation is that it may affect us, right? Voters. Right. When you're talking about the ocean, or you're talking about the fate of, kind of third world or developing world deckhands, it feels very far from us. It's not in reality. The oceans affect our life directly, but it feels very removed from us, and so there's much less urgency from the public.
What was sort of most surprising out there? I mean, you knew it was there, but...
I mean, there are a bunch of answers to that. One is floating armories, so post-2008, height of Somali piracy, there was the emergence of the private maritime security industry. So these are, kind of armed guys who were hired to board mostly merchant vessels as they head through dangerous neighborhoods, and usually they're picked up at the front end of a dangerous patch, and then they're dropped off on the other end. So there was an unusual historical moment in the normalization of the arming of merchant vessels in that fashion, on the one hand. On the other hand, post 9/11, there was a heightened fear in countries and in their waters about armed guys coming in their waters.
Right.
And so that spelled a problem, because if you were going to have armed guys protecting your cargo, what did you do with them so that, before you have to come into the port? And
so you put them back on these armory ships.
You put them on these floating armories emerge, and they sit anchored at the 13-mile mark or just outside of national waters on the high seas, and you drop those guys off there. And these armories are, one part weapons depot, one part bunkhouse, and they have 40, 50, 60 guys who are waiting for their next deployment and sort of stuck there.
Sort of a saltwater, blackwater.
Right. Yeah. And so just the existence of these vessels and what life is like on there, and who are these guys that work this type of job, and that was a perfect example of just this weird other world.
They're out there reading a lot of Anna Snin and other classic feminist literature.
No comment.
Few people do what you've done with Outlaw Ocean, which is just kind of express the strangeness and lawlessness. Even the way we get 90% of our goods through global shipping. Most of these ships are under flags of convenience. Monrovia and Panama don't actually own tens of thousands of vessels, but they appear to be, because that gives a certain legal freedom and tax exemption and ability to dump waste and all the kind of outlaw aspects that you talk about. So I imagine the book's doing really well.
Yeah, I think it is. Actually, I'm a bit surprised, to be honest, because it's a dark topic. There's a lot of really depressing stuff in there. It's a long read. And as you well know...
No. Even though I haven't read it yet, I'm going to say it's a fast read, it's engaging,
well,
it's
no,
powerful.
People are saying it is, and I'll believe them because it feels good. But I had no idea whether it would do well or not, but it seems to be doing well. I think the experience of going out there is both somewhat akin to space travel and time travel. Space travel in the sense that you're sort of climbing into this spaceship, right? That is a fishing vessel or whatever it is, and you're trapped there, and you're moving through a fairly desolate, sometimes perilous place that you can't really step onto, and you're going long distances to somewhat unknown places, and time travel in the sense that you're witnessing things that I at least thought had disappeared and were now just the stuff of history books, slavery and
murder,
whaling and piracy and private or buccaneers and kind of
Arg.
So I just think it is really an eye-opening frontier.
How many days at sea did you do, not just on the book, but also on the series that led to the book, you think?
So the book took about 5 years to report, and I'd say maybe 2 years of that 5, all told, was at sea.
So this book is out now, and soon will be in paperback. And what's the full title? It's
The Outlaw Ocean, Journeys Across the Last Untamed Frontier.
Blue Frontier, I like it.
Blue Frontier is better than beer. For one, our foam is saltier. For over 15 years, we've been reporting on the problems facing our public seas and empowering citizens to take action to protect our ocean communities. Go to www.bluefront.org to learn more.
Hi, my name's Elise Landon. I live on the beach in San Diego, and I'm the first listener to subscribe to Rising Tide. Special thanks to Blue Frontier, Studio K May, and Ocean Conservation Research for making Rising Tide possible.
Hope you've enjoyed Blue Frontier's Rising Tide Ocean podcast. Tune in next time for my interview with ghost net buster Mary Crawley. Mary's the first person to remove over 40 tons of plastic debris from the high seas, and is going after the next 400 tons this summer. Plus, we'll hear more of my interview with Inland Ocean Coalition founder Vicki Nichols-Goldstein. Don't forget to tell your friends about Rising Tide, and also subscribe yourself wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, let's end today's episode with our theme music from singer-songwriter Ethan Kenvarg.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free. The sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the blue frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.